So hello everyone, my name is Caitlin Young Gilbert. I'm a CMRP and the head of community at the Maintenance Community Slack group. If you're not already a member, please join us. I'll add the type form here in the chat so that you can sign up. Cliff is one of our active members and I'm so excited to be partnering with him for today's webinar. It's a community of over 2,000 maintenance and reliability professionals sharing best practices, questions, ideas, and one of the conversations about leadership and leadership fundamentals really spurred this inspiration for today's webinar. So please, if you haven't already joined us, sign up through the link that will come through later. I want to just take care of a quick housekeeping item. So if you hover your mouse over where you see my face and Cliff's face, a bar will appear at the bottom that says a few different icons. If you click on chat, that's where you'll be able to ask questions, introduce yourself. We have everyone's microphone and camera turned off for now. So if you have any questions or anything at all you'd like to mention, please click on chat. And I will make sure to ask that in the last 10 minutes when we do Q&A. A question I get a lot is, will there be a recording of today's session? And the answer is yes, absolutely. It will be emailed to you if you registered, which you did because you're here. And if you are watching this recording after, you most likely found it in our Slack community. If anyone wants to rewatch it, if you go to our Slack community and click on webinar replays, all past events live there for the full recordings. Without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Cliff Williams of People and Processes, who will be doing today's webinar. Thank you so much, Cliff, for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here. Okay. Okay, let's kick it off. Yeah, Cliff Williams, great to be here. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm not sure what time it is down in New Zealand, but anyway, it's great to have everyone on board. So over the last few years, I've been visiting and working with organizations, a number of companies to help them with leadership and moving their organizations forward. Each time that I would visit a company, one of the things that surprised me the most is that the biggest challenge that they all face was not so much in the exact leadership, but because they were going to train on that. But what the problem was that they really didn't have the structure in which to use any of the learnings that they would get from the sessions. But before we start, let's take a safety moment, as we always do, and I'm sure you all do, is take a safety moment. And we can see that this organization really believes in safety, you know, because of the size of the banner. It's a big banner, nice big banner. But realistically, are they living their slogan? I don't think so. Another thing that's interesting in this picture is that we can see that they actually have a skyjack just to the left there that he probably used to put up the other side of this banner. But it didn't work where he wanted to go now. But, you know, being a conscientious guy, he carried on anyway, you know, as the job needed doing. Now, I liken this to the organizations who wanted to educate people about all of the soft stuff, the relationship stuff, you know, that type of topics on leadership. And what they were trying to do was to give them their people tools to succeed, only to find that the basic structure wasn't there to take advantage of those tools. A bit like the skyjack. It's a tool they couldn't use. Great to have one, but we can't use it to get the job done. And that's what happened with those organizations where they wouldn't have the structure, but wanted to learn about these nice soft topics. Because typically what happened was, just like the gentleman in the photograph, they resorted to the old way of doing things. for the simple reason that the tools didn't work for what they were being asked to do. So we need to remember that good managers may be good leaders, but the good leaders must be good managers, and that they're really intent on being successful in the producing of the results that are required of them. So what we won't talk about much, and for those of you that have who know me, you know that I will talk an awful lot about these things normally, and I've been around the world discussing all of these things, but today we're not going to talk about them much. Motivation. Okay. Now, yep, it's a key part of leadership. But if we don't have structure and direction, we may actually be motivating the wrong behaviors. Integrity goes without saying. This is essential for leaders. And without it, you won't succeed. So basically, if I have to talk about that, we're going to be here a very, very long time. Passion. Can you think of any leaders who didn't have passion? Because very simply, if you don't have that passion, they're not going to have it. And we're not going to tell you how to inspire the people in your organization. And in fact, that would be a pretty tough ask because I don't know the people in your organization. I don't know what's going to inspire them. So we won't talk about that. Transparency. I'll tell you right now that if you try and have leadership and you're trying to embrace all of these skills, if there are hidden agendas or there's lack of sight, then this will quickly, very, very quickly derail any effort. And honesty. It only takes one untruth. You know, that's it. If you're caught out telling untruths, then you're pretty much finished because your credibility is shot. And without credibility, you're not going to build that trust. And without the building that trust, you're not going to be leaders. But again, this is really not what we're going to talk about. And these topics are definitely key to leadership and could form another webinar or even a workshop as they have done. But today, I want to talk about how we suggested to those organizations who were looking for these soft skills and everything, how they could be successful. And even the topics we're going to talk about today could be broken down into their own webinars or workshops and things like that. So what we will talk about is a process, and not just any process, but how do they manage their process of doing business? Each organization has its own way of doing business, and understanding that will help people move forward in the leadership search. What tasks will their leadership have to carry out to be successful? Once we have that process, we understand what we need to do, how we're going to be successful, what tasks are going to achieve that success. And then to achieve those tasks, we need tools. So what tools are required for people to be achieving the tasks that deliver the process? And that's what we're going to talk about today, and the different things that make up those topics. But a quote, before we go much further, if you think about in history, how many times there were leaders who were clearly brilliant leaders, yet they weren't successful. Or think about those leaders perhaps who were successful, but it's something that those following them didn't understand or even want, yet they followed them. But what we want to talk about today is delivering results, because as Mr. Peter Drucker said it, effective leadership is not about making speeches or being liked. Leadership is defined by results, not attributes. And that seems to have got lost over the years, and people have focused more and more and more on the attributes and less and less and less on those things that will deliver results. So goals. Very simply, when I get to an organization, I ask the leaders, do you have clear, concise goals? And quite often the answer was kinda, sorta, maybe. And then I'd have to point out that kinda, sorta, maybe is actually the opposite of clear and concise. And so the answer really was no. And then we would talk about how, how well they understood that, how their goals, not only what they were, but how they impacted the organization. And when we get into those discussions, we actually find that realistically, this is how the goals should have been derived in the first place. Next was the idea around how are those goals impacted or impacting the people and the departments in and around theirs. And what we often saw was that departmental goals were mutually exclusive. Maybe procurement, had their goals and achieving their goals of reducing inventory really impacted, maintenance from being able to, have the parts and do what they needed to improve uptime, which in turn then affected operations as they weren't able to produce their quota, they weren't able to hit the production numbers. And so what we saw that was that the impact from one part of the organization to the other really wasn't known and wasn't thought of. And that was a challenge. Then what we looked at was with the tradespeople, the ones kind of that the maintenance managers who were typically the people in the classes, maintenance and quite often production operations managers. But how did the tradespeople, and the operators, how did they actually impact the leadership goals? What tools did they have, and how did they impact the goals? Could you be successful without them? And the answer obviously was no. And when I suggested that, that some of the people were being set goals that others actually had more influence over, the strange thing is that most seem to agree. They seem to accept this, and they seem to say, yeah, we understand that. Yes, okay, we get hit with PM compliance. And when I ask, okay, whose measure is that? And usually it falls to maintenance and planning and scheduling, and that's the challenge. And okay, they're the ones that are held accountable for it. And then when I ask, what are the reasons for not meeting compliance? And the answers I would usually get is that equipment is not available. Sometimes we don't have the right parts. Sometimes the production supervisor will pull off, the tradesperson and send him on another job. And they all kind of nodded and agreed, but didn't seem to see the irony of it, in that a goal that was one of maintenances and planning and scheduling in most cases in particular, really maintenance had the least influence on. And, so the irony was pointed out to them, and we built on there. And in fact, typically when I talk about PM compliance and measures and things like that, is, I'll say that PM compliance is a really good measure, but not for measuring PMs. It's a good measure for measuring collaboration of the organization, so that all are pulling together and working in the same way. And people start to realize then that the success of the other groups directly impacted on the leadership goals. So the next question is, do those that work with you, the maintenance group, the guys, the tradespeople, or even the operators, did they have goals? Did they know if they were being successful? And it's unbelievable, but many, many, many times the answers were no. And I likened it to being a Canadian. I use a Canadian example, but I'll try and make it cross the border and borders. But it's like playing ice hockey in Canada, and you forget to bring the nets out onto the ice, or you're playing football in the US, and you forget to paint the goal lines in there, or you're playing baseball and you take away home plate. Is how do these people understand when they're doing well if they don't have goals that they can measure and aspire to? And when you think about this, we want to sort of motivate, inspire, we want to build relationships, and yet we don't have goals. So the challenge becomes is how do we have meaningful goals that would let them, at least understand if they're being successful, instead of running from one end of the field to the other, or just dumping pucks, or just keeping running around the three bases because there's no home plate. Let's give them a goal so that they can attain it, they can reach it, and they can turn around and feel good about themselves. So, without this structure, all the motivation stuff really, really doesn't work. And then last, but certainly not least, based on Mr. Drucker's definition, or Mr. Drucker's quote, is, do they understand the connection to the strategic goals? Do they understand that what they do impacts the department? What the department does impacts the plant or mine or whatever. And what they do impacts the well-being of the organization. Do they understand that? And yeah, one of the things that came across loud and clear was the lack of detailed goals. So a question I always get asked when I bring this up at the organizations is, how are we supposed to set these goals? Now, this is a graphic that I've used for many, many, many years. And it really just explains in very simple terms the way that goals should be arrived at. It's not usually, but it should be. And that's where the company starts out with its strategic goals. It has a reason for being. It has goals it wants to achieve. And what needs to happen is, once those goals have been set, then they need to be able to cascade down so that each plant or each mine or each facility, whatever it is, totally understand how what they're doing impacts those strategic goals, and what they need to do well to achieve those strategic goals. It needs to be clear, and it needs to be their goals, because those are the things that you want to achieve. And then we take it and we take the plant and we get every department to sit around for one goal setting session, and we say, okay, these are the goals for the plant. And by the way, these are how they support the strategic objectives. And then we say, okay, what role does your department play in achieving these plant goals? And we have the discussions, and we find that sometimes people want to have, really look inward and sort of say, these are our goals. And yep, they may be goals for a maintenance department or a procurement department or an IT department, but they're not necessarily the things that support the plant's goals. They become disconnected. So what needs to happen is they need to be connected so that everyone understands how what they do impacts the plant's goals. But they also then, in this goal setting exercise, understand how it impacts the other departments, and so that they can build together collaboratively. And then the beauty of that should be that when you've done all of these things, when you look at your department goals and they seem to be, where they need to be, then you can see that the plant's goals are being achieved. Or if not, why not? One of the other departments may not be doing so well, but it becomes apparent. And similarly, if the plant is doing well, then hopefully the company is doing well by achieving those strategic goals. And that's the way that we get away from mutually exclusive goals. It builds some team, and it certainly breaks down silos and reduces the impact of one department affecting another. So when we have the goals clear, then we need to talk about expectations of how can we achieve the goals. So we're going to have to describe the standard you expect. And that's not just its standard in the results, but also in how they achieve the goals. Obviously, you can't be totally prescriptive. Yeah, you don't want to be, it's too rigorous, but you have to be clear what is acceptable and what's not. This will guide them on how to behave. This will encourage some risk-taking, but it'll be guided risk-taking. And what is that tolerance of risk? Of course, any improvement has a risk, and everyone has to understand how much risk can be tolerated, and even how much failure is acceptable, or whether there needs to be mitigations or contingencies in place as these risks are taken. And again, we come back to, does everyone understand why the expectations exist? Why of the process? How are they related to the goals? And when you've explained and expanded on the expectations and how and why they exist, you need to make sure that everyone's committed. And everyone needs to be committed to the supporting the effort that you have. Sometimes people will disagree, and that's okay as long as they're prepared to commit. That's fine. And what you'll find is that the agreement will come later, as you begin to succeed. And now it should have become obvious to everyone that communication is key. It's certainly key to making sure we get the results we want. But there's effective communication and ineffective communication. Again, back to basics. Communicate the why in everything, not just the what. People will then get behind the effort when they understand the reasoning behind it. And this is kind of expanding on the expectations that we discussed a little earlier. But be sure to allow feedback and be sure to listen to what they're said. And the challenge is that, if you only talk about something once, then it's unlikely to bring the results that you want. So you need to communicate often. Now, equally important is not just what we want to communicate, but often how we communicate. And one-way communication, that's where you talk, post memos, do all of these things, is bad communication. Okay, sometimes it may be appropriate, but as a rule, certainly not. Now, if you're listening as well as speaking, that's good. That's good. That's two-way communication. But three-way communication, where you speak, then you listen, and then you give feedback, based on what you hear, is even better. But when you can achieve a situation where there is ongoing communication, where people feel they can say what they need to, that's best. As this will result in the honest communication, that will mean that everyone can actually focus on those real issues, and they'll not be sidetracked by those hidden agendas that we talked about a little earlier that we don't really want. Now we're getting to the point now where the rubber hits the road. Do you really have the resources that you need? And do you have the resources working with you? Are they available? And again, not just any resources, but the right resources. And do those working with you have the resources that they need? There's the old cliche that people are our greatest assets. That's not necessarily true, but good people are our greatest assets is certainly closer to the truth. So what we have to make sure of is, does everyone have the skills required to do the job or to make the decision that you're asking of them? Do we have the right tools? And these may not just be physical tools, but things like your CMMS, all of these information systems that's going to allow people to make the right decision, because that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for people that are capable and making right decisions. Also, if there's a specialist need, or if we want to get the best out of systems like the CMMS, has everyone had the required training? It's not unusual to hear that people have kind of joined the company and then given immediate access to the CMMS with no training. And people try and figure out why they don't get the information. Next, then, out of the CMMS can come some of this is, have we provided the requisite knowledge? Is the information needed? Is it readily available and people know where to find it? We see organizations where, because they have data, they think they have knowledge. And that's not always the case. First, someone needs to turn that data into information, and then we need to pass on this information so they can be turned into knowledge. I know this is not often thought of as a resource, but it's probably one of the most important, if not the most important, because without giving the appropriate level of authority, then we're not going to get the results we want. So many times we've seen it where people have the required skills, the required tools, required training, develop the knowledge, only to see them wasted because people don't have the authority to exploit them and reach the levels that they probably could. Now, one truism that maintenance and reliability leaders speak is that we don't have time to do everything. It's true. So we need to start to delegate some of those things. Some of those things for which we've been considered responsible, but have added no value. We still retain the overall responsibility, but why are we doing things to which we add no value? Now, once we're certain that the resources are in place and not before, you don't want to start delegating halfway through this process, then we can start thinking about delegating. As with expectations, we need to be clear about what the outcome of the delegated duties should be. There will usually be constraints and restraints, and seldom do we have wide open scope. And so we need to be sure that everyone understands what they are, because there's really nothing worse than having people committing effort and energy, only to find that there are existing constraints and restraints, and really, struggle then to figure out why they put the effort in when people knew that these things existed. So if there are constraints and restraints, communicate them. We've talked about communication, but make sure that it's understood, because if they hit a roadblock that they should have known about, what you're going to find is that people really won't be that, very accepting of taking delegation the next time. Now, once everyone understands what's needed, then, and what they can do and what they can't do, then check in along the way. But you need to be sure to communicate that this is a checkup on how things are going and not on how they are performing, because that really should be what it's about. And that the intent is to support them and maybe adjust course if necessary. And then at the end of the process or project for which you've been delegated, sit down and discuss the outcomes. Were they exactly as expected? What could we improve upon? What should we change? What should remain the same? And in general, what can we do better in the delegation process? The other thing to think about is that succeeding today doesn't mean that you're going to be succeeding tomorrow. You know, there's an old saying that if you're standing still, you're actually going backwards as those around you are moving forward. And to continuously improve, the absolute necessary is that you have to change. Because as Mr. Einstein said, or at least it was attributed to him, the definition of insanity is to do the same things every day and expect different results. Many years ago, when I was at a conference in Florida, probably 30 years ago, there was a gentleman up on the stage who said it much better, in my opinion, than Albert Einstein. And he was a maintenance manager from a paper mill in Florida. And he stood on the stage talking about change. And he said, "You always do what you always did. You always get what you always got." And 30 odd years ago, I still remember that. And there is nothing truer than that. You know, it is the absolute truth. You'll always get what you always got. And again, we're back to expectations, because now this has changed. So the expectations quite possibly will be different and to the ones that you currently have. So you want to make sure that that is reviewed. Again, why? Why the change? Why the need for improvement? Why this particular approach? As we mentioned earlier, you know, why will help you get buy-in, and what will get you compliance if you're lucky. Next thing is to review how things are going to change. What will be different in the future state? And the biggest challenge in managing change really is the fear of the unknown. And that's what makes people anxious around change. So the more you make known, the less the fear. So now we're on the journey. We really need to know, how are we doing? Based on those cascading goals and everything that we talked about earlier, we need to get down to nitty-gritty measures that will gauge how well we are doing in those things that we contribute to. And that's measures for us and those we work with. Now, please make sure that they are really relevant to the specific goals you've identified. So many times I've seen measures adopted because everyone measures that, or I read in an article, or on LinkedIn, that somebody said that was a great measure. It's not necessarily relevant to you. So make sure that everyone understands what and how you exactly are measuring. And more importantly, why? Why are you measuring this thing? And this will help you out when you're trying to figure out how to improve performance. Let people know what's acceptable again. It may not be perfect, and it may still be improved upon, but setting people up to fail by having unreachable targets, that's really not a good thing. So everyone should know how they're doing against the measures. They shouldn't be hidden in a drawer or on a file in a computer or anything like that. If you have measures, make sure that everyone sees them regularly and understands how they're doing against them. It's your duty to communicate the results often. and then discuss how things are going and what may be, what may be sort of a way of improving. And again, focus on the why. The numbers are what they are. The reasons why the numbers are what they are is what's important. Now, we're not living in a fantasy land, and so after a period of time, we need to face realities. We need to really have a good look at the outcomes. We need to look at the outcomes in a lot more depth than the periodic look at the measures. Are we actually achieving the goals? And this is not a bad time to actually take a look at, are these really the right goals? Are they still relevant? And if we understand the why of everything and not just the what, we will know where we need to make adjustments. And as mentioned, there's a possibility that it may even be in our goals. And there's nothing wrong with that. It may be in our measures. But what we want to do is get everything on track. And, every now and again, it doesn't hurt to evaluate your performance. How have you done? Do you know? How do you measure that? Are there things that you can do better? And why not ask those that work with you? Many times I've gone back, once I've started in a new role, and asked the tradespeople or whoever it is that I am working with, a series of 3 or 4 questions. What am I doing that's helping you? What am I doing that's getting in your way? What can I do better? And how can we work together to, enhance their performance? Figure out, how you're doing, because the people you work with are going to see your performance through a completely different lens, a different perspective than you do. And throughout this process, we've talked about setting goals, expectations, communicating them, delegating, measuring, but without one thing, none of this works. And that thing is accountability. Truly is the cornerstone of leadership. And to start the process, you need to be accountable. It starts with you. You need to be accountable for your words, your actions, for your results. You need to own them and take accountability for them. When you take accountability, you need to be sure that you don't start to fall into the victim syndrome, where you blame other people or make excuses or create the impression that you were the victim in all of this. This is essential for you, as you can't accept these things from those around you. And the quickest way of losing credibility as a leader is to say things like, well, I told them it wouldn't work, but they went ahead and did it anyway. Or, well, don't blame me, it's not my decision. And the reason is there's no way you'll be able to hold anyone accountable from that time on. You've shown that you won't take accountability. You can't play favorites. It's got to be consistent. So when holding people accountable, it has to be consistent for everyone and in all circumstances. It can't be a sometimes thing. One day, people are going to be held accountable. Next day, they're not. And as soon as that starts, people will use it as an excuse for not being accountable. But the secret about accountability is to turn it from how it's normally perceived, which is a negative fashion, discipline, those things, and start to think about it as a learning opportunity. Why didn't you achieve a goal, or did someone did something wrong? You have accountability by asking why, and then figuring out how to do better the next time. Now, if it turns out that someone has all of the tools, the knowledge, the resources, the authority, and they were willfully negligent, then the answer to why might be they're not the right type of people we want on our team. But that should be the exception. Because if we've done all of the things that we've talked about in the webinar, then, it won't crop up. And at one organization that I visited, they actually, started using this term, and using learning opportunity as something that they could build upon. And now that we've looked at all of the struggles that we may have, and the secret is, let's not forget to celebrate. We should never discount the momentum celebrating success can bring. It gives people the encouragement to keep striving. It's a bit like Jim Collins describes in his book, Good to Great, about the flywheel effect is, the first few times you try and turn the flywheel, you can't get it to run. But by persevering and getting the momentum that you want, you can make that flywheel take off. And the other thing is, you shouldn't wait until the end of the project or when all of the goals have been met. Look for something along the way. There will always be successes, and you want to celebrate them. A small improvement is nevertheless an improvement. Now, of course, you don't want to have a full-blown party off-site, each small improvement. Something that recognizes the improvement is essential, and something as simple as a thank you. But when you reach the major successes, then obviously you want to make it more meaningful. And you need to celebrate the success of the individuals as well as the group, or on the group level. But this is where it's really important that the celebration is appropriate, because I've seen some cases where some people really like it, if you single them out for thanks, especially if they're in a group. I've seen it where you walk into a lunchroom and thank Cliff for doing a great job, and Cliff's shoulders, get broader, his chest gets a little bit more puffed, and he sits around and really enjoys it. And I've seen situations where you go in and you say, that was a great job, Cliff. We think you did outstanding. And the guy just shrinks. There are people that don't like public praise. Walk along with those people, give them a good thank you, put your arm around them and sort of say, this has been a great job that you did as you're walking along, and not embarrassing them will certainly work better than, embarrassing them in the lunchroom. And, the challenge is, as a leader, you need to know the difference. You need to know the people well enough to understand who likes what. Plus, you need to understand what's meaningful to them, especially if you want to give them an award or a gift or whatever it is, something like their favorite football team or author or musician, because if you give them the wrong one, it can be counterproductive. Up in Canada, it's hockey. And so if you have somebody that's a Toronto Maple Leaf fan and you give them a Montreal Canadiens sweater, they will take that as being an insult, not a celebration. So you need to understand your people and understand what's going on, and understand what they like and what they don't like, so that you can then really, celebrate appropriately. What I forgot to mention at the beginning is I wrote a book about all of this. It's a story of how one group in a paper mill went from zero, to hero, and using the principles that I talked about. In fact, it's mostly my story. And I talk about all of these topics. And it's not from a theoretical perspective. It's from what was for me a great experience perspective. Really, really did enjoy it. So, and it's in the form of a storybook. It's not a technical manual. It's an interesting story, and a lot of people have said they've enjoyed it. From people and processes perspective, these are some of the things that we do, which is a whole bunch of things. And they're not the only things we do, because again, whatever your problems are, we will work with you. And that is what we typically do. We will, come and talk and understand pain points, and we will work with you to achieve those, or to eliminate them. And all you need to do for any of more information on any of these things is get in touch with Tammy, and you'll see the email there, tpickett@peopleandprocess.com, and she'll take you where you need to go. And last but not least, any questions? If you think of them later, that's okay. Or you can reach me at any of these emails, or you can reach me on LinkedIn or the Upkeep community site, as Caitlin mentioned earlier. We're having some great discussions on there. So that's it for me. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cliff, for that amazing presentation. We do have a few questions from the audience. So I'll start with Francisco. They asked, how do we engage upwards? So the people above us and downwards, for instance, on the floor shop, to get the same goal all together.
Now that's a very unfair question. And I'll explain the reason that that's a very unfair question is that I used to be, until a month ago, the corporate maintenance manager for the company that Francisco is a maintenance manager for. So I think he's talking about me. I'm not sure, I don't know if that was kind of an insult or whatever. Really, it's, and Francisco knows this, is really about communication. And it really is about all of the things we've just talked about, is that if we can have measures and we can have results and we can show all of the things that we need to do to get better, or what we're doing and getting better at, that's the best form of communication. But again, communication really is two-way. And so it's okay to use all of these things, use all of these tools, but if we find that we can't actually get the message received, and that becomes the challenge, because it could be in the perceptions of the receiver, then we have to get a little deeper into what is it that really is going to turn their crank. What are the things that they value? What are the things that they consider success, and relate things in those terms. Anytime we have that sort of situation, it's always a challenge, because you have to learn how to manage your manager, for want of a better term. And there are good articles around that in how to do that.
Excellent. Next question. David would like to know, how do you manage up? What's the best ways?
Same sort of answer again. That's it exactly. Is you need to understand. You need to really understand what motivates the people above you. Or how they like to see things. And frank discussions are a tough thing, but they are perhaps the easiest way. I have been in that situation where, I'm honestly thinking that I'm doing a good job. I'm trying my best and everything. And yet I'm not managing up, because, the person above me it doesn't seem to appreciate and get it, whatever. And, actually getting down and saying, okay, can we just have an open and frank discussion? What is it that you want from me? What is it that you will see success in me? And if they're open enough and they're prepared to give you that information, that's going to form the basis of how you manage up. It's understanding your boss. I've seen situations where we have a boss and they want to know the ins and outs of everything, every last detail. And you walk into the room and you say, everything's fine, and walk back out. It doesn't work. And then there are the others who just want to understand because they trust you. They only want to understand that everything's fine. And you walk into a room with a big binder and start quoting figures and things like that. They turn off very, very quickly. And so it's what turns them on, what turns their crank, what do they value? And then you have to use that to manage up. But again, it's that relationship, and you're building that relationship. But if every week you're going in there with, yeah, everything's fine, and this person is a control freak, then you're really not going to do it. Nothing's going to change. So it's getting that understanding what turns their crank, how they want things delivered, how they want to understand things, and providing it.
Thank you. Akeem would like to know, how can I motivate a demoralized team, especially when the company management policy is not really encouraging people to put in their best?
Oh, wow. You got a toughie. Um, but again, and that's a tough one when the company itself is not supporting all of these things, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it yourself. And that's where you start to have to develop the culture. And again, it comes back to what we talked about having these measures in place, having things that you can start to work with the group and sort of say, okay, these are what we think are good measures. These are things that we can control, and it may be very small things, but you start with the small things. These are things that we can control, and we're going to see if we're going to make them better. And we're going to figure out ways of making them better. You got to engage them. You got to empower them if you can. But, originally you have to explain that, okay, these are the things, let's work on them. Let's make things better. And in our little world, we can take pride in that, and we can celebrate the success in that. And it's difficult in an environment where the rest of the organization is not coming along from the right, but it is still doable. It's focusing what your group can control and what you can control, measuring it, and showing that, hey, we can make things better, and we can take the pride in that. Most people go to work and really want to do a good job and feel that they've done a good job. What may be happening in this environment is that they're doing a good job and feeling that nobody appreciates it. And so they only carry on doing that good job for a while until the point where, yeah, they're not going to go back to the football analogy and the hockey analogy and everything like that, is that, the players are not going to go killing themselves if there are no goals. The hockey players are just going to stand on the blue line and hit the puck down and hope that they're doing something. The football players may run to the halfway line. The baseball players may get as far as first base and sort of say, I don't know, nothing really is telling me that I'm doing well, so I'm going to stay here and not put in an effort. So you've got to get them so that they will understand, and take pride. But without goals and showing them that they're succeeding, that's very difficult to happen. So whatever it is in your little sphere of influence or sphere of control.
Thank you. Let's see. Next up. Oh, I think we hit all of the questions. The next question was similar, about how to deal with demotivation and disengagement within your team. So I
Yeah.
think everyone's, struggling with the same kind of themes. Oh, we have 2 new questions coming in.
Okay.
Do you have tips for gaining buy-in for safety changes, as the current program is lip service as productivity takes precedence?
Yeah. And not an unusual circumstance by any stretch of the imagination. But the whole sales pitch on safety is around, that we want everyone to go home the way that they came in, and people to understand that, yeah, it may, if we don't get a safety culture, if we don't have safety as a priority, then maybe it won't be you, but maybe it will be you. And one of the gentlemen that was on the call, Brian Rapatini from New Zealand, had a great um, way of doing it for shutdown turnarounds, where he brought in families and families of people who had been injured, and let them talk to the people and sort of say, okay, you think that safety is not important? And let the families talk to them and, tell them how important safety is. It's tough. Yeah, we're always going to do that if people are paying lip service. The organization needs to, really look at itself, because if they are putting people in the environment, and you can switch that and push back to the organization, even in that, pointing out that, yeah, not doing things safely, maybe, maybe allowing you to run a little bit quicker and do much more because of the production. But someone getting hurt will cost you an awful lot more than that. And so even if you want to appeal to their more capitalistic viewpoints and not their humanistic viewpoints, is that safety costs money as well. Having a good, safe environment costs money, but having an unsafe environment costs a lot more money. So people need to understand that. But again, difficult to motivate if your organization's not doing it. It's within your sphere of influence again. It's pointing out that that, as I say, everybody should be going home the way they came in. And if we don't get that across the board, then who's to say who's going to be the unlucky one? And you don't want it to even be close to you.
What skills do you think you need to lead a maintenance department effectively? And are there some credentials that would showcase these leadership skills?
Okay. Now this is where I kick off usually with one of my favorite presentations, because I kind of I do the same thing I've just done for the last hour, is that, the skills that you need to be a really good maintenance leader, good leader, things like motivation, inspiration, all those soft things that I talked about up front are the things that you need to be a good maintenance leader. You need to be technically adept, that's fine. But if you can't manage people, because it's all about people, and those are the things that you need, and that's why we went through all of the things that we did today, is those need to be in place first. They are the things that work. But yeah, absolutely, the soft skills are key, but you have to have an environment where you can make them work. If you don't have goals or anything like that, you can go in and, like we just answered the question, you can go in and sort of tell people, come on, yeah, we're going to go play hockey, we're going to win this game, we're going to, yeah. Where are the nets? Where's the goal line? You need to have all these things in place so that you can then motivate the people to achieve them and then celebrate achieving them. You've got to understand their different personalities. I do a whole presentation around soft skills and relate them back to maintenance management. And when I do that, the kind of the lights go on and people say, wow, yeah, that makes sense, because it's people. Machines are fairly predictable. If you grease them, they usually run. If you don't grease them, they won't run. People, completely unpredictable. So you have to learn how to manage those people, and it is a people manager. So yeah, for me, it's always been, and Francisco would vouch for this, is it's always been about people. I may not have been the brightest, sort of sharpest tool in the shed as far as technical things concerned, but I could get done what I wanted done, and we could get to where we wanted to be. So through managing the people.
Awesome. Last question as we're heading up to the top of the next hour. While I ask this and Cliff answers, I'd love to invite Tammy Pickett from People and Processes to share any links, emails, anything at all on how to get involved with Cliff for any more training, more questions. I know people have lots more questions than I can get to than one more. And I know there are many situations that are very particular to you and would need a little bit more in-depth time. So People and Processes are an amazing organization that can help you with all of that. And I'll ask Tammy to provide all those links in the chat. And if the chat's giving you any trouble, we'll make sure in the follow-up email with the recording to add it there as well. So last question for you, Cliff. How do you change the culture of celebrating big recoveries after failures and instead celebrate proactivity and failure prevention? For some people, they think that's boring, but how do we make that shift?
Yeah, and completely right. I liken it to, the firefighters, who, like, they're the heroes, and they really are not the people that you want. You want the fire prevention officer, the guy that's going to make sure that that you're not having a fire. They're the heroes, not the firefighters. And it's the same sort of approach that you do with this is that you start to have good measures around prevention, good measures about improvement, good measures about success, and keep bringing those out. Don't celebrate that. Yeah, we were great. We jumped in, we got that up and down, and yeah, it was fine. We fixed it in 6 hours, and it's okay, guys. We did well. Thank you very much for responding the way you did. But you know what? Let's try and figure out how we can prevent that from happening, because it affects the organization. So if you could have again, go back through what we talked about, these cascading goals, so that you could say, okay, you know what, you did a great job on that, um, repair, that getting back up and running. It only took us 8 hours, whatever it is. But let's look at our numbers. That 8 hours cost us 8 hours downtime. It cost us X amount of product. It cost us this type of money. It cost us, and show how it's not achieving the goals, and that the team is there to achieve the goals. So it kind of starts by getting all of the correct goals there, having people to understand how and why they're the correct goals. And then you can take them back and say, yes, we understand, and we thank you for doing a great job. That was excellent. But you know what, it's so much better if we don't do that, if we don't have to do that. But yeah, people like to be the heroes, and it's one of the challenges of trying to change a culture in an organization, is that if I'm a hero today and you change things so that they don't break down, I'm not going to be a hero anymore. I'm not going to be the good guy in the place. I'm not sure if I like this change. It's sort of, oh, okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to buy into this. So it comes back to, again, all of the things we talked about, making sure that we have the goals, the communications, all of the things we talked about today are those basic things that then you can build upon. Without them, it's like building a house without a foundation. It's just going to crumble eventually. So getting that foundation there, Francisco.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Tammy was so kind to add a link to the chat about how to learn more classes from Cliff. So please check that out. We will again be sending this recording, and that link will be as part of the recording in the chat. So you don't have to worry if you can't get to it right now. Thank you so much, Cliff, for the time today and answering all these questions so thoughtfully. I know you are active on LinkedIn and in our Slack community, so if anyone has any follow-up questions, they can also find you there. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Caitlin. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.